Tusen takk og velkommen, alle sammen. This event today will be in English. Welcome to the Norwegian Film School's Artistic Research Cafe, number 4. It's actually starting to feel like a fairly established format. I'd like to welcome everyone here. Today we're going to be presented with a number of approaches to interactive storytelling. We have at the Norwegian Film School a number of projects underway, a number of artistic researchers who are working on interactivity and narrativity from different aspects. And it's something that is starting to become more and more important for filmmakers and storytellers for all kinds of screen-based arts, where we see even now with HBO's series Mosaic and the Netflix series Dark Mirror Bandersnatch, interactivity in storytelling is becoming a much more commonly accepted thing, even though it's not a new thing. It's very interesting for us at the Norwegian Film School, who have for so many years been based on a very traditional approach to storytelling for cinema, to start exploring what are the other ways that we can use the tools of our craft to present stories in a new and interesting way. But I don't want to say too much. I'm going to turn this over to the 5 people who are presenting today. First up is Professor Maureen Thomas, who is coming through the back here. I'll let you introduce yourself, Maureen.
Thank you. Am I turned on? Can you hear me? So, yes, you can see from my first slide that my name is Maureen Thomas and that I'm here on behalf, well, I'm here from the Norwegian Film School, but what I'm saying is my own personal thoughts. I'm not necessarily speaking officially on behalf of the film school. But could I start by asking you a question? And could you, if the answer is yes, could you say yes firmly and raise your hand? Do you like films?
Yes.
Good. Have you ever played a video game?
Yes.
Good. So now I know who I'm speaking to. Okay, so this is the project that I'm working on. It's called Queen's Game. And it's in 2 parts. There's an interactive video game with Snowcastle, and then later an augmented reality version of it. And the idea is to bring people into real history at Akershus Castle in Oslo through the magic of King Arthur's realm of knights and ladies. And the main player character is Princess Margrethe, born in 1353, who later became Queen Margrethe of the whole Kalmar Union, which she essentially brought about. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of context. 2003, Barry Atkins wrote this book, More Than a Game, thinking about the idea that games could be more than shooters or adrenaline-driven games. This is just a little survey of the sort of research that I've been doing personally. Some publications from the last 10 or 15 years. And you can see it looks as though I'm doing an enormous range of stuff, but actually I'm not. What all this comes together over is the notion of the spatially organized narrative. Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Has anybody played this game?
Yep.
Yes? Thank you. It's the latest in the Lara Croft Tomb Raider franchise, and the authors say it's not just about possessing an object, going into a tomb, everything crumbles and then leaving. It's about learning that archaeology is also culture and history and language, and that involves people. So the new Canadian producers are more interested in that. And Lara doesn't appear half naked a lot of the time. She's actually clothed, which is quite good. You probably have seen this. Who's seen Tomb Raider 2018? Yes? By your very own, directed by your very own Roar Uthaug. indeed a graduate of the Norwegian Film School, and right back in whenever it was, 2000 and something, he was present when I talked to the school about games as a narrative possibility, and very sceptical they all were in about 2000. Games, those are for children, really. But we're now used to the idea that characters can hop off the games console and onto the screen, and that's what Tomb Raider has done several times. And now, of course, it's happening with television. Game of Thrones, in 2014, the Telltale Games version of Game of Thrones came out, and it too is a drama. It's people talking to each other, moving about in a dramatic world. And right back in 2009, James Cameron was, of course, speculating on what is the difference between a movie and a 3D immersible world. And of course, what he tries is to show how the hero, who's a helpless veteran, injured, in real life can, when he becomes an avatar, he can be active, he can become something that he's not in real life, and he can also learn to empathize with the culture whose avatar he takes on. Already in 1995, Cameron had experimented with this idea of total immersion. He wrote the script for Catherine Bigelow's Strange Days, which was looking forward then to a millennium, to the year 2000, when we would all have this squid technology, which would allow us to actually plug in with electrodes to our brain to record our own experience and then to play it back. And as you see, Lenny, the character, says, this isn't like TV, only better. This is life. It's a piece of somebody's life, pure and uncut, straight from the cerebral cortex. You're there, you're doing it, you're seeing it, you're hearing it, you're feeling it. And his girlfriend, Faith, says, well, do you know why it is that movies are still better than playback? Because the music comes up, the credits roll, and you know when it's over. So, you know, it's a futuristic horror version of living in total immersion. And by 2010, films were being made which used tropes from games but were not derived from games. So they were expecting that people understood film language and game language and could enjoy a film which is based on the kinds of things that happen in games. By 2013, Sci-Fi and Trion Worlds had got together to see what happened if you made a game and a TV series with the same characters and broadcast them at the same time. So in theory, what you could do was play the game online. The actors were the same, the motion captured, and the voice acting was the same. And the situation's the same. The aliens have come and filled up the Earth, and our hero, a human, has to work with his adopted alien daughter to get through this difficult territory. And the idea was that if you played the game, you could actually influence what happened in the episodes on television. It didn't quite succeed in doing that, but it got quite close. And it's still up. It's still running, the game is still running, on tryonworlds.com. Then, in 2005 already, we'd had Fahrenheit, which was also called Indigo Prophecy, which is a detective psychological thriller where you can play a number of characters. And the level of reality, the level of cinematic realism was very much higher than most of what had gone before, and it also had the possibility to interact between characters in the game, which was not something people had really been able to do before. That was followed by, from the same company, by Heavy Rain in 2010, which had even more cinematic realism and an even more complex story. But the story is not the main thing. It's a quest, really. It's trying to recover a lost daughter. In this case, those of you who in the very old days played Silent Hill will remember that that's a rather successful trope for a game. But the state of the art now, I think it's fair to say, in dramatic storytelling in game fiction is The Last of Us, the second one of which is due to come out this year, by Halloween, they say. And that's a post-pandemic world. People have been infected by the cordyceps mushroom virus, and our heroes have to try to see whether they can get through a hostile landscape, but also find a cure by using the blood of the girl who has apparently survived an earlier attack. So it's got a very complex story, but the story is purely a cinematic story. You would recognize it as a movie story. Has anybody actually played The Last of Us?
Yes.
Yeah. Did it work for you? Yeah, it worked as a story? Did you enjoy the game? Yes, no?
Yeah, I enjoyed the game.
Yeah. So this impossible idea that game and story can be combined in some way seems to be becoming a possibility. It used to be said that, ludology, narratology are at a war. Games and stories can't exist together. In fact, even Lucas, who did an excellent game very early on, Grim Fandango, thought that was not possible. He said people who want to watch films, people who want to play games, and they won't be the same. That was in the 90s. But now here we are, and it's beginning to happen. But some of you may be wondering, what are we doing somewhere which calls itself an artistic research cafe? What is this artistic research, and what importance does it have for the rest of the universe? I can't exactly answer that, but I can say that, it is an accepted thing that the outcome of research is new knowledge. And in general, what happens is that you have research going on, usually in a higher education institution. You have teaching and learning, which intersects with it. The research feeds into the teaching and learning. And then you have the real-world impact of the research that's being done, and, of course, the teaching, because people come out into the real world. So what's being done in the world of research in a higher education institution like this is looking forward to, for example, the people graduating are going to graduate in 3 years' time. They're not going to graduate today. They have to know what's going to be going on in 3 years' time. And the research is looking for what can the future hold? Where can we go from where we are now? And it's different from what's possible in most commercial environments, because most commercial environments need to optimize something that they're already making. They can't afford to put research into something when they know it might fail. And of course, all of you know that that's true in the industry, in film, television, games, whatever. It's very hard to try to do something that is so different that you don't have a business model for it, you can't budget it properly, and it might fail. So in the world of advanced research that we have the luxury of inhabiting, we have the possibility to try things out which may or may not work. And we hope they will, and that we'll learn something from them, but they might not. But what is this real-world impact? Well, here I've cited the queen of interactive narrative research, Janet Murray, who used to be at MIT Media Lab and is now at Georgia Tech. And her book, which came out in 1997, has been reissued in 2017 in an updated edition, because really nobody has written anything more groundbreaking. So that's, 20 years. And what she says is, I want to say to all the hackabards from every field, gamers, researchers, journalists, artists, programmers, scriptwriters, creators of authoring systems, please know that I wrote this book for you. That she's done the research, she's done the thinking, she's looked at all the possibilities, and she's made some suggestions. The other queen of interactive and immersive storytelling, I think, safe to say, is Marie-Laure Ryan. And again, her book, Narrative as Virtual Reality, came out in 1997 and was reissued in 2016. And once again, very little change has happened in the basic understanding of what's possible in these worlds. So that's one way in which research gets into the real world. But how else does impact happen? I'm going to tell a little story, and I'm not going to take too much credit for it, because it wouldn't be true to do that. But you've probably seen, at least advertised, Black Mirror Bandersnatch, Netflix's interactive branching story. Has anybody actually done it? Has anybody done it all the way through?
Yeah.
Right. So you know what's in there. It's quite a lot of stuff, and it takes you quite a long time. Did it take you more than 90 minutes to do it? Yeah. So it's more than the length of a normal film, and there are lots of different pathways you can take through it. But how did they manage to do it? There is an article which Frederick Grava drew my attention to in Wired, which has a lot of interesting background information from the people who made it. So if you want to know more, you can look it up on Wired magazine. and see what they have to say about it. But what I'm going to say about it is that between 2004 and 2007, I was involved in an EC-supported collaborative research project, which was to develop the technology to actually make these kinds of complex narrative, and using the same system, editing system as it were, to be able to send this stuff over broadband and have people interact with it. We finished that project in 2007. At that point, smartphones were just about something that somebody was dreaming about. So we couldn't actually do it because we didn't have the phones to do it on. We worked with BT and with the Spanish Telcom to do it. But it is actually these... Frederick, how do I get to my video? The work that we did, of course, was published in millions, not millions, a lot of articles, and we showed it at various, at various expos and play. And so I'm just going to show you, this is from 2007. The convergence between screen media predicted a decade ago, facilitated by digitality, is now a reality. The University of Cambridge's digital studio, based in the Department of Architecture, has from autumn 2004 to summer 2007 participated in New Media for a New Millennium, NM2, a 13-partner, €5 million integrated project partly funded by the European Sixth Framework Programme, Information Society Technologies, cross-media content for leisure and entertainment. The NM2 project has developed both a new software toolkit for producing and delivering interactive fiction and factual content, and in symbiosis 8 prototype pilot model productions, which push the boundaries of interactive narrativity for delivery over broadband. These are designed for a variety of platforms, from the big screen and television or home entertainment centres, through computer screens to handheld devices. From July 2007, the NM2 toolkit will be made available for open access via the internet, hosted at Shapeshift TV by 2 of the project partners, BT and Goldsmiths University of London. For the NM2 project, the University of Cambridge Digital Studio, Digis incorporating Cumis Research, developed 4 of the pilot model production projects. Gods in the Sky Choice is an adaptive interactive documentary about the science and mythology of ancient cultures. It offers a wide range of material, including dance and puppet drama, as well as scholarly location-based commentary. Using a remote control, viewers select sit-back entertainment, education, or information mode. They can then choose topic, depth, and length, and will see a fresh programme at each selection.
We drive our 24-hour clock and our 7-day week. To the ancient Egyptians.
WAG TV, who made the original footage, televised it in linear form on Channel 4 as 3 50-minute episodes. But there is no original linear version, no director's cut, in the interactive adaptive Gods in the Sky Choice. The whole pool of media items is swept by the system for each programme you request, and once an item has been played in a session, it's not played again. Cambridge City Symphony is a prototype interactive updating of the great montage-based city symphony cinematic genre of the 1920s. It enables visitors to explore the city at different times of day through their own choice of topic and length, creating associations and routes by visual means combined with a variety of audio tracks. This new digital approach organises the narrative of the city by time of day, by activity, and by location. Gormenghast Explore is an interactive, spatially organised dramatisation of BBC TV's Gormenghast, adapted from Mervyn Peake's novels. It develops a completely new media content format where visitors explore the 3D environment of Gormenghast Castle to trigger the video stories of the characters who inhabit it, each playout freshly configured at every visit. Visitors can choose to follow a character or a storyline, or watch what happens in a particular room. In Peake's novels, The narrative voice is the voice of the castle itself. He writes, "It was Gormenghast that spoke, Gormenghast, whose voice is endlessness of endlessness, the voice of stones heaped up into grey towers, for stones have their voices, voices that grind at night from lungs of granite." In Runecast, fortune-telling offers visitors their own personal entrance to the authentic myth world of our Viking and Anglo-Saxon ancestors, enabling each interactor, through original contemporary music, video, song and story, to become the hero of their own tale. It's not just the world of heroism, portrayed in Peter Jackson's movie of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings novels. Ancient Nordic culture saw life as a constant play between chance and choice, and practice of casting the runes, which inspires the interface for Runecast, is a way of asking chance for help with difficult decisions. Visitors enter the Nordic myth world as a 3D navigable environment, where they can consult the shaman Vala and find music, video and stories, as well as a new fortune every time they visit. Real-time layering and oral storytelling techniques combine with chance operations to make every visit unique. So that, I was the principal investigator or co-investigator of that project for Cambridge, and so I created the Runecast piece myself and worked on how to actually understand narrativity in such a way that it could be made interactive and make a system which could be used for very different kinds of production. And of course all that was published by 2007. So the people who made the Bandersnatch software had not just that EU project but lots of other projects to draw on. They didn't just take out of the air the programming to make it possible to do this branching narrative. And indeed, ways of organising narrative had been thoroughly discussed by Murray and Ryan in 2005. You could find this online, and this really is the... No, you can't see that. I have to give you a laser pointer. This version of the predetermined narrative with alternative endings, where you can skip about within it from node to node, is more or less the version that Bandersnatch uses. But how did I get there? Well, I came out of a background in theatre and television, directing and writing for theatre, music theatre, and writing for film and television. And I got very interested in something which I'd been pursuing as a graduate researcher early in my life. How does oral composition work? Because oral composition is much closer to what you can do in virtuality than anything linear. So here's another thing that I did for an exhibition. Same sort of idea of bringing. Am I still audible? Yeah. Of bringing immaterial culture into an exhibition.
My name is Maria Sibylla Merian. I want to inquire into everything that exists. That is my passion.
So in this, the music and the voice are randomized, and the visitors to the exhibition can visit this Suriname virtual rainforest, which is entirely based on the illustrations from this 17th century naturalist. And many of the plants have now vanished. That rainforest doesn't exist anymore, or parts of it. So this is really the only record. And what the artist, Norwegian artist, Maureen Thomas did was to use games technology to create an artwork where you could visit in 3D the work that this 17th century naturalist had created. So visitors to the exhibition can move about and explore the world that she's created. So all those research interests of mine come together, more or less, gradually. Medieval drama, which is played in real places. Old Norse Icelandic Edda poems and sagas, which are spatially organised dramatic storytelling, related to the oral composition and framed improvisation that they come out of. And medieval storytelling altogether, which is spatially organised like it's performed and oral antecedents. And medieval mystery plays were performed with scenes on pageant wagons which were dragged around the town, and the audience could wander about and look at these in any order they wanted, with the performances going on continuously, the same scene being played. So the spatial organisation of narrative is really a bit like a market, with market stalls that you can wander around, whether you're doing it in real space or in computer space or virtual reality. And so I've used a great deal of the techniques of medieval storytelling from a time when really here in 1495, this is the first time these Arthur stories are printed. And things have to be on pages, they have to be linear because one page comes after the other. But that's not true of computer space. It doesn't have to be linear at all. And in some ways, we're approaching a world which is more like the medieval aesthetic world. Those little tiny manuscripts that they had for personal use are very like the little handheld devices that we have today. So my research currently is looking at whether digital media can open up history and help us to encounter medieval people as they represented themselves, not as we imagine them. Can we use the aesthetics and modes of storytelling to do something different with computers? And this is the inspiration for the visuals, a particular manuscript. As you can see, they told stories in pictures, and the characters are very lively. You can see what's happening, you can see the world. And the story is based around Princess Margrethe Valdemarsdottir, who was born in 1353, died in 1412. And I would like to engage more people than the normal game world to see if people who like history, who like stories, can enjoy this way of investigating history. And princesses are very popular. Even your very own Elsa and Anna, Norwegianized, because after all there aren't any mountains in Denmark, are part of the Disney family, and Disney offers this range of princesses to inspire the young women of today. And it occurred to me that actually authentic history might be just as inspiring and provide a different kind of figure. So Margrethe really did live in Akershus, and Akershus is there. So here she was as a real princess. She was married at 10, a mother at 17. 27, she was wearing the triple crown of Norway, Denmark and Sweden, and the sole sovereign of the biggest state in Europe. She ruled by diplomacy, not war, for 44 years until her death in 1412. And how much do you know about what she did? Nothing. Why? Well, who was it who said the history of the world is the history of wars? Margrethe avoided wars. And so she's not in the history books. But I'd like to see what it was like to be a real medieval princess. Here is the recent Danish history of the Middle Ages, which covers Margrethe's period. And it's flashing by you, but I hope you can sort of get an idea of what's in it. It's beautifully produced, sort of documentary, has a presenter who speaks and has voice over the dramatized little moments. And the little moments stick very carefully to what you can see historically, so you don't break the historical code. Here is how much you get about Margaret, and I took a frame from every scene in which she occurs. She's born. She's married at 10. She has a baby. That's it. Up to 17, that's her life. That's all you know about her. And then suddenly, some years later, she's the greatest stateswoman in Europe. How did she do that? How did she become the greatest stateswoman in Europe? I asked myself. Well, television, and we're thinking today about the differences between what you can do in linear narrative and what you can do in explorable narrative. Television can use 3D virtual modeling to suggest a lost building, which they do very well in the TV series, that's how much you get of Valdemar's new stronghold that he built. And bare ruins, artfully lit, beautiful to look at, don't really give you an idea of what life was like in the Middle Ages. They might tell you, they might avoid breaking documentary authenticity, but they're not really giving you an idea of life. And you sort of imagine Margrethe and Håkon sitting round in Akershus Castle with bare walls and a couple of candles and a sort of brown tablecloth and some wooden bowls. This was the royal family of Norway. And this is what the Middle Ages liked. They liked colour, they loved colour. And it feels to me that this is a world that we can explore in virtual reality because we can do it. It's very hard to recreate all this stuff in a real castle. But we've got lots of hints from medieval manuscript material. So we're looking to try and, in this project, and you see the change in typeface is meant to indicate to you that this is a work in progress. We only started on it at the end of November, and the people at Snowcastle working on the game didn't start till January. So we've really only got very few months' work behind us. But hopefully we can do something which will be centred on young Margaret and how she became what she became. And we can use the architects' drawings of a reconstruction of Akershus. We don't have to actually build it, we can make it in virtual space. And Margrethe, who was a chess player, her chess set remains, it's in Sweden. But she's a pawn in a game of state chess. And I want to see how she actually managed to develop her talents to do what she achieved. So we're using chess as the basic metaphor for how the game works. These are some designs. You can see that the character, sort of the story character, has a chess representative, and these chess pieces can be used to enter the story. And Rafael Hansel is in the process of 3D modelling these chess pieces so that we can use them in the game. And it's based on the idea that Margrethe dreamed of a life of knights in shining armour, just as we do. And in this game, you can follow her dreams by using her chess pieces into the stories which happen in King Arthur's realm. But we have now got a small prototype of what might happen in the virtual world, or at least the game world, and I'll play it to you by kind permission of the team at Snowcastle, with the proviso that this is absolutely a preview, and these are all placeholders. This is not really what it's going to look like, but it's a bit what it's going to look like, and it'll give you an idea. And they've already solved some of the problems. For example, character running about in a long skirt. Those of you who've played Zelda in your youth will remember that, let's say, Ocarina of Time. What happens? Princess Zelda, long skirt, very beautiful. Does she do anything? No, she gets rescued by Link, who does all the work. People find it very difficult to make characters run around in long skirts. But now we have a character who can run around in a long skirt. And the music's composed by Karina Greshary, with whom I worked on 2 of the other projects. You've seen the Marvelous Transformations project and the Runecast project. And she's particularly good at using historically accurate instrumentation and modes, but at the same time creating music which is very listenable to for modern people. Can we turn the music up a little bit? So you can see that even with 3 months' work using placeholders, we're beginning to get to a quite atmospheric version
But I will give you an answer.
of Akershus.
You will play a game with me first.
And we're working on the artwork. Wenke Helkors, who's here today, one of the MFA people at CEFIMA, DNF, has been helping out with concept art, translating the medieval characters into something that could be made in 3D. And then eventually we will do an augmented reality version, transposing the dramaturgy to actual Akershus so that you can visit and find Margrethe in her childhood home. and her little white cat will hopefully guide you to find different things in that world. So I hope that's made a tiny bit clearer the way the kind of practice-based research that we're doing here fits into a bigger world and can help to develop storytelling work, because we're not really focusing on the technical aspects. The technical aspects being provided by various people, and in big research projects you make a collaboration with people like BT or universities which have technical departments that specialise in software design. But we are interested in what are the possibilities for the storytelling and how does immersion help? Is it a useful thing to do? And so I hope that's given you a little introduction to what we're doing here. Thank you.
Hello? Yes. Okay. I'm doing a research project on the intersection between the art of storytelling in video games and personally created narrative through play. And I'm also looking at getting some assistance from artificial intelligence in some way. My name is Bendik Stang, and I am a creative director at Snow Castle Games. As a part-time job. First, for those who are not so familiar with what game design is, it is a lot of different skill sets coming together to create something more than each part. Here are some of them. For what I'm focusing on here, I will be very depending on writers and programmers and game designers and interaction designers, and of course any visual representation as well, so basically all of it. Yeah, so that's just an overview of what game design is for those who are not so familiar with it, or game development. What I'm looking at is two different types of narrative. You have a crafted narrative, which is known from films and books, and I'm just going to turn off my phone. And then you have personal narrative, which everyone here is familiar with from their own lives. When you go through your own life, you create your own story based on choices. From our previous game, we have access to about 1.8 million people, and they're quite enthusiastic and wants to contribute to not all of them, but many of them, to development. And so there's something there. I'm not quite sure what to do with it, but I think it's very interesting. And then finally, it's various forms of artificial intelligence that I'm looking at ways to help make the narrative experience better. So I'm just going to start with the crafted narrative. This is typical linear storytelling. It's based on few or no choices, or mostly no choices. This is a very commonly used also in video games, even though you have interaction. It's typically a story that you drive, but it's still that one story that's told. You can't really make changes to it, so you don't have an impact except just driving it forward. And then I'm just going to show a little continuation of Quantic Dream. Let's see if I can get that to run. And I don't. Let's see, I can just open it again. There we go. Do I have audio? Yeah.
You've been gone for 2 weeks,
Oh,
so the place
come
is a
on.
mess. You do the housework, the washing, you cook the meal.
Okay. Let's try one more time, see if I can get the video to actually play and not just... Yes. Okay. So this is a continuation of their
You've been gone for 2 weeks.
fork narrative,
This is a mess.
non-linear narrative.
You do the housework, the washing, you cook the meals. That's Alice. You look after her. Homework, bath, all that crap. Got it?
Right away, Todd. Aren't you going to school today? I'm sure we used to be friends before I was reset. Maybe we can be friends again.
You shouldn't mess around with my stuff. It makes me nervous.
I'm sorry, Todd.
What are you looking at? Maybe you think this is easy. Maybe you think it's my fault your fucking mother took off. Fucking whore walked out on me for a fucking account. Come back here. You stay there. Don't you dare fucking move. Alice! Daddy's very mad. It's all over now. Daddy isn't angry anymore. You know Daddy loves you. This is all your fault!
He's coming. He's gonna hurt me. Run! Get away, or he's gonna break you like last time.
You're coming with me. That's enough! I want you to leave Alice alone.
She's mine. I do what I want with her!
Kara!
Come back here!
Watch out, Kara!
Okay, so this is a point I wanted to get to. Yes. This video clip illustrates another form of nonlinear storytelling because you can rewind and then choose another path and then rewind and choose another path, so you can kind of get multiple angles on the story. but it gets extremely complicated after a few choices, and it's almost like it will be like a chess game for a computer. That is, if you try to calculate all the alternative outcomes, you get astronomical numbers, which are impossible to solve or to calculate. And so probably needs some kind of superpower to be able to deal with that amount of choices. And then the next narrative is the personal narrative, the one that we all personally know. You set out on your own adventure. The game facilitates, or the world facilitates, that you can do multiple things. You can create things, you have multiple choices, and then through time and choices, you make your own story. But this is based on choices, whereas non-linear narrative and creative narrative is mostly made without choices, or if you do have choices, it's extremely complex to write all the various alternatives and the outcomes. I'm also subdividing a personal narrative into two types. The single-player narrative, which is basically yourself with a box of Lego pieces or some other dolls or something, and you make your own story by yourself. And then you have the fun that you when you play together with friends, and together you make a story. So those are the narratives I'm looking at. And then I'm going to mention the community input. I have no clue how to deal with it, but there's a lot of people with a lot of input. How to get anything out of that, I'm not sure yet. My team, we're 15, and there's absolutely no way we can communicate directly with 1.5 million people. But it is a massive creative force, so I would really like to see if there's something I can do to tap into that. And the last one is creative AI, or AI-assisted creativity. My current approach, and I'm just starting this, so I'm not quite sure where it will end, but my current approach is to try to subdivide or to structure stories into different types of story structures, and then I think I'm going to try to explain this with an example. Take Romeo and Juliet. It's between two families who are opposing each other, and in those two opposing groups, you have two sub-characters who are in love, and they cannot be together because of the external forces. But whether those two are in two different religions or two different kingdoms or in two different cities or bandits and good people or whatever, it doesn't really matter. And also the other characters around them doesn't really matter. So basically I'd like to try to create the stories without any defined character, but have the characters as character traits. And then as the game progresses and the dynamic world that we're creating changes, the AI will try to find characters in that environment and put that story in there dynamically. So this is what I think I called adaptive form of narrative. Yeah, adaptive narrative. Wonderful. So this is as far as I've gotten. I'm not quite sure where it will lead. And I also dotted out the community input because it seems very difficult at the moment. And there's so much exciting stuff on the other side. So I'm going to focus on that for now. Thank you.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Really nice to see you all here. Let's see if I can plug this in quickly. So my topic is documentary in VR, just so that you can sort of reset your minds a bit. Let's see, there we go. Oops. Yeah, it doesn't show there. Let's just hope that the sound works. Yeah. There we go. So this is me, Elin Festøy. And as you know, since you're here, I'm doing this research fellowship at CEFIMA. And very quickly about me. I have a background as a journalist and an editor, and I see going into this gradually how important that is for the way I'm approaching documentary or journalism in VR. So I started to put it up there because I think it's important. I'm also a documentary producer, worked a bit with that, and now I call myself a creative producer. And these are two productions that I've made that were launched last year. One is Hans Børli in VR, VR experience with the poetry of Hans Børli, and the other is the mobile game My Child Lebensborn, which we're calling a documentary game, since it's telling the true story of what happened to the children of German soldiers in Norway after World War II. But this is on the mobile screen, so it's not VR. But that one is, yeah. So for this, for my project, I'm really building on my experience from the mobile game My Child Lebensborn, and also of my love of this new VR medium, because I think it's just so exciting. This whole new space to explore for storytelling, where we don't know that much, but it's to be able to be part of building this knowledge is really fascinating. So what I want to explore is how we can use the VR medium to communicate important stories, journalism or documentaries, and make an emotional impact. Because we are flooded with media content, we get numb when it comes to the headlines in newspapers, and we know that games, interactive stories can really make us feel in a stronger way than even films. Films are great for creating sympathy, but games can actually create empathy because we interact with them. So this is something I'm really fascinated by. And I thought, first of all, just to put this up there, because a presentation of this level should have a definition, I guess. Because working in this field, when it comes to interactivity and also VR, the term documentary becomes problematic. I'm feeling it doesn't sit right. And it's really, it isn't just restricted to film, but it feels like it, that people, when you use the term documentary, they're thinking about actual photos or video. So I know that many, for instance, Sheffield DocFest have started to use non-fiction as the term systematically, because documentary somehow doesn't feel like the right fit. So that's just one tip for you there. So. In my presentation, I thought I'd show you sort of mini versions of different projects that I find interesting in the VR documentary journalism field. Very briefly, so that you have a kind of an impression of what VR can be, because I guess you know it's about having the goggles on your face and the headphones, and then we're hijacking your senses, and then the brain helps us to fill in, giving us a feeling that we're actually inhabiting this other space that we visit. The simplest form, I guess you could say, is at least the easiest to get started with, is 360 video, where you're having a camera on a stick that films everything, and then when you watch it, your head is where that camera is, and you can look around. And then you have animated immersive, which is really a drawn world that you are inside, but where you can't interact with anything. The next level is then really that you're in this animated world, looking around, and you can actually do stuff and make choices. And then everything gets mixed together. And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there also when it comes to AR, which is the Pokemon version where you have sort of objects placed in real space. But that's more of that in years to come. I thought I'd start with a 360 film, because this has been really, this is a format that has already shown itself to be really, really useful for journalists. Because when you're inside a 360 film, you in a way, you feel as if you've been there, and people remember things as if they've actually been at this place. And one of the strengths of this is that it's so believable. When you see a place filmed in 360, you see that there's no team standing behind the camera. You really feel that what you're seeing is true. So I'll just show a small piece of this here. This is BBC film. Let's see. No, it doesn't play. What is this? We struggled with this before as well. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. I think we had the. No. It worked. Let's see. You said restart, Bendik. What did you mean by that? It's just YouTube. Yeah. I think
everyone has a dream here.
Give up on that one then. But it's basically, as you can see from this one picture, yeah, with the camera and the journalist, and you can move the picture around, and you can see the situation with the journalist and all the people and the actual scene. So this is already a format that is very useful for journalism. The next one, I don't have a film for this one. This is a 360 documentary called The Ark. I think it was premiered at Tribeca 3 years ago. The good thing in this is that you get very close to a white rhino, something that you couldn't do in real life. But in this 360 film, you can actually look straight into the face of the two last remaining white rhinos in the world. Again, a format that really, when it comes to telling this story and giving people the feeling of being there and understanding the importance of protecting these animals, this is a very effective film. Another thing they did is you have this whole 360 globe, and they cut it in two. So on one side you see the rhino, and on the other side you see the genetic lab in New York. So you can, while you're standing there, look at the researchers and look at the animal at the same time, which is a new format that I haven't seen anyone else doing. But then moving from 360 video to animation. This was shown at IDFA this autumn. It's from a Danish director called Peik Malinovsky, he wanted to tell the stories of refugees sitting in an asylum home in Denmark, waiting for the cases to be resolved, I guess. And I thought I'd show you the short trailer. Of course, you need here to imagine that you're wearing the goggles and that you could look around. So you're actually, you end up sitting on a bunk in this room. So you have to imagine, since this is a flat screen. But let's play this.
This room, I feel cold. I feel cold and alone in it. I mean, not just the weather is cold, but I feel cold in my heart. Time is a stop for me. Time is like a train that stops in a station. The seconds, the minutes, the hours, they are very slow.
The camp was right next to the sea.
And I go out.
At night, sometimes
I sit and listen, you know, when the wave moving.
It was alive with the motion.
That's like, for me, it's a meditation.
It made me feel connected. There's a life on the other side.
One thing that I find really interesting with this production is, I mean, I guess many of you have, well, some of you have been in the situation where you have these interviews of a group of people. What they're talking about, their experience is this experience of stasis, how they are stuck in their lives. They're sitting in this room waiting. And this is just another, let's see. Yeah, sitting in this room waiting, and you have these different voices. And while you sit there, this is a sort of sit-down experience. The room is drawn up around you. You hear the voices talking about their lives in this room, while the room is being painted and built up around you. And you get this incredible sense of stasis yourself. You're stuck in this room, which is, I think, rather beautiful, because that is the whole message of their interviews, is also how they are stuck in this situation. And if you saw at the end, the wall behind the bunks turns into this beach. And while you're sitting there, you see the beach, but you can't reach it. You are sort of, you're stuck in this place. So that's a very good example, I think, of immersion, which is really in VR, that this sense that you are bodily present in the situation, which is really important for the way you tell stories. So that was this room. And then Thin Black Line. That's one of the works of, I guess, VR director Oscar Rabi, who's one of the most known VR directors in the world now. He's done many interesting productions. This is telling the story of a bomb raid in Australia in 1942. They thought the Japanese were invading, and about a family fleeing. And they have this artist doing these drawings. And in this, you have a kind of interaction, because you can pick up this doll, and that moves the action forward. And you are on lorries trying to escape, and you play through these different scenes. So it has some interactivity, but it still has this immersion. And another thing that's same for both of these is that the story is really pushed forward by the linear narrative of the voiceover. So these are linear productions. This was the only trailer I could find, so it shows a bit of the artist, but also it shows small glimpses of the production itself.
I know that my hand is grabbing charcoal and doing a stroke, and that's at its core. That's what drawing is reduced to. In the VR, all of those strokes, they all become animated. There's an element of movement and time. In terms of the translation of what I'm doing, I'm thinking that the end result is like a whole world of my drawings, given a different kind of life to them.
So this is very poetic, but at the same time it's still quite linear in its structure, although you have this interaction with the environment to push the story forward. And again, now we're coming back to The Guardian, which I think that this one is really, it's really evident that journalists have made this one, because this is more about presenting all the facts and all the aspects of the situation of being in solitary confinement, 6 by 9 feet, I think is the measure of this cell, where you can move in this cell. You can't really interact, but you can at least move around from the door to the bed. looking at the things that are lying in the room. And at the end of the experience, when they're talking about how you go a bit, you get hallucinations if you're there too long, you will sort of float up and feel that your senses are sort of being manipulated. So that you are integrated into the story in a different way. They're using this opportunity to manipulate your senses instead of you taking part in a linear story. So it's a bit more interactive than the previous ones. And also you can see how they've put infographics, text on the walls.
You're going to be here for 23 hours a day.
You are going to undergo many different kinds of reactions. And some of them will be more immediate than others.
Keep your eye on survival.
Memorize your space. After a while, things start to slip.
I find myself floating.
The toilet that drips.
People turn on themselves.
It's almost like you want to feel alive.
You do something to make them notice you. So, now that you're here, what are you going to do? What can you do?
6 by 9, a virtual experience of solitary confinement.
So, and I thought lastly I should mention Nadja Lipsyc. She's coined the term immersive journalism, and some people call her the godmother of virtual reality. She began very early, and she even built her own headsets, the thing with the red sensors on top. And what she's been doing is really to go much further in how to present journalistic content. One thing is, that's one of her early works is up on the left, which is called Hunger in Los Angeles, I think. It's about, she's animated this line of people waiting for food, and one man in the queue getting a diabetic shock, which was one way of visualizing a social challenge in Los Angeles at the time. And this picture is of a lady experiencing this, and what Nadja Lipsyc saw that when this man collapses, you will sort of go down, you would want to help him. Because in VR, you get claustrophobia, although the walls are imaginary, you can get fear of heights, you really feel a presence, so you have a physical reaction to what is happening, and that's something that you can really also utilize to tell stories. This is Project Syria, where she had a mobile video of a girl on a street corner in Aleppo singing a beautiful song, and then suddenly a bomb goes off. And you can see in the screen, you have the journalistic content in the little screen, but what she did was she rebuilt the whole area, the whole crossing where this girl stands and sings. So the information that she didn't have in the small video, she created that so that you can see the scene in the bigger context. So that, again, a small fragment of journalistic recording can be placed in a broader context. And the top right, that's a 911 call about domestic violence, where she has created the whole scene while you're listening to the actual tape from the 911 call. So she's taking fragments and using VR to fill in the blanks so that you get a different journalistic effect from the material. And I would really recommend that you check out some of the videos on YouTube with Nadja Lipsyc. There are some really nice interviews there introducing immersive journalism if you're interested in this. She's really the one, the best one out there. So, about my work. This is really, with linear, where you have a voiceover or a different story pulling you along, you're being informed on the way, but you don't really have that much interaction. Or the other alternative is really the more non-linear, where you have to navigate a topic or a field, and you're also being challenged how to interact and how to cope with the landscape that you're exploring. And that's what I want to test out for my project, because when we interact, it's emotional. That's why I love this picture with the colors. Instead of being told something, to really have to grasp and deal with it yourself. And this is from the mobile game that we made. As an example of your interaction, how it's very emotional. You have to choose what should you say to a child that's suffering and in pain. What would be the right thing to do? So the interaction drags you into a very emotional place. So my project now is still about the topic of children born of war, the children born with enemy soldiers as fathers. I want to try to explore emotionally laden interaction so that the experience will make you feel the situation of these children. So these are some of my challenges. I want to use the presence that you can have in VR so that to see if we can actually feel that we meet these children face to face, so that we feel in a different way what this is about instead of reading something or being informed. And also to challenge the user to try to explore the mechanics of prejudice, how the way we're looking at things might change with the perspective we have. And this means, I'm thinking of this as a landscape where I present the topic of children born of war. We have these characters, the children, the mothers, the fathers, the enemy, the local community, and how this can be in this landscape for us to find and visit in a non-linear way. And what I see is a parallel that keeps coming back to me is the way I worked as a journalist. This is years ago when I wrote this double-sided spread, where you have a topic and you have to see what are the different aspects of this topic. How can I take the different pieces of information and place them out so that you as a reader can visit this and explore the topic? So every text is linear, obviously, but you have these different information points that you can visit, and that's also the way we read in a newspaper. We skip, we jump, we might read the small text first to see how we approach the material. Obviously, when you're visiting a landscape where the information and the topic is spread out for you, you will choose how you consume the green dots. And that means that you have a linear journey. You have your user journey, jumping from dot to dot. So your experience is linear due to time. I want to try to provoke, maybe have a companion that follows you linearly through this landscape. We could also play with the landscape being more claustrophobic or less claustrophobic, depending on how you interact with it. And this is a very rough but early concept sketch where we have the green dots again, how I've placed the topic out in this landscape and how you have a linear journey interacting with this, getting your feedback on the choices you make as you move through this. And the last slide is really about challenges, because I want to create emotional engagement with the material, and I want to challenge and provoke you with your companion that is sort of questioning your choices and also helping me to explore prejudice. But I don't want to manipulate. The user needs to have enough space to be able to think for itself, and I don't want to impose my own view, because different perspective and different views on the world. So this should make people reflect and think, but not, if it's too imposing, it wouldn't work. It's all to create reflection. So that's, wish me luck. This is, I think, a huge but very interesting challenge. And I hope you'll come back here in years to come and see whether I get any closer or not. And that's my email if you have any complaints or ideas. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Working progress.
Yeah. With this. Må jeg fortsette? Å ja. Å. Det var ikke tilfeldigvis sånn lebegreie. Jeg har så innmari tørre lepper.
Men da må jeg gå og hente. Du er på.
Oi. Er det noen som har leppepomade?
Du må gå og hente dere, så da kan du få.
Ja. Ja. Aha. Nå har jeg fått leppepomade, så nå kan jeg sette I gang. Okay, English. Since there've been a lot of talking so far, I thought I would just start with a short clip from earlier work, linear, not VR, just as an introduction so that you know where I come from. We hope the video works. So, let me get back to my presentation, if I can find it. Yes. So, my name is Cecilie Levy. I'm a screenwriter, and as you have just seen, my background is in traditional film and television. And now I am a researcher at the at the Norwegian Film School. I am Norwegian, but I moved to Amsterdam for about more than 20 years ago to go to film school, and I've lived and worked there ever since. And now I'm back as an artistic researcher at the CEFIMA part of the film school. I'm one of 5 researchers there, exploring new formats in new ways of storytelling. So there were 2 key words when I was preparing for this presentation, and they were actually things I never thought I would busy myself with. One was interactivity, and the other is PhD research. But yeah, so here I am. The CEFIMA. I'm going to quote one of my colleagues who's not here today, the fifth avatar, Frederick Howard. Why are we doing this research into new film, new media, new ways of storytelling, when we all love film so much, which Maureen already asked you? And I think he has a point here, and at least during the time that I've been doing this, isn't this really is it me talking too loud or? Yeah, better? Yeah, better. Thanks. He says, because I believe games could be the art form that goes beyond the static, dramatic representation in dynamic emotional force. And I think at least that's something we should keep in mind, that film is already maybe becoming a bit set in its ways, lots of conventions, lots of limits, and now that I find myself surrounded with gamers as my colleagues, I was used to having gamers at home on the couch playing video games all the time, but now I also have colleagues who play games, and it's very inspiring, and it's very it's opening my mind to think about story in another way than linear storytelling. So this is my current working title, Teaching Myself How to Write for Virtual Reality. And it sort of, it tells you this, it shows the scope of the research I'm doing. I'm going to use my experience and knowledge as a screenwriter to contribute to creating new formats in a virtual reality. And Maureen asked if you had seen films and if you had played video games, But she didn't ask if anyone has seen VR. I mean, raise your hand. Oh, good. So most of you have actually experienced it firsthand. So that makes it easier. This was my research proposal a little more than a year ago, and my first approach to this artistic research. I wanted to do an adaptation of a short film called La Jetée, which is a beautiful film, and it has some associations, it has some elements which makes you think that it could actually work in 360 or VR. But as I was working with this and investigating this adaptation and the possibilities of making this work in a 360 or a VR environment, it started to feel like I was trying to put square pegs in round holes. And it felt like I was reaching the boundaries of what was possible. And I felt I had to go back and rethink and take a step back and to do that and try to come up with something which was more fit for the medium, which was not only a translation, but originally written for the medium as I got to know it better, as also the development in the field are going very quickly at the moment. A lot of new stories, lots of new examples came about. I was able to see them, and I could see that it was moving fast. So an adaptation, it felt like it was not the right time, or it felt like it was a bit behind already. So I started looking at what I do when I write for traditional film. As I've said before to some of you, it's like playing a piano. If you know, if that's your instrument, you know when you play the piano, you sort of know what it will sound like when you press the keys. And I can do that to a certain extent with traditional film. But now I noticed that I had to become more conscious of what I was doing and why that didn't automatically translate into virtual reality. So the difficult words. The camera has told us where to look in cinema. Lighting and lenses have further provided avenues for a diegetic approach. Am I pronouncing it correctly? This is maybe the most obvious difference between film and virtual reality. Film consists of frames, of moments in time, put into a linear structure, and the story arises from those images. So when you enter the world, the viewer or the user sort of becomes the camera. So we lose control over that storytelling tool, which the camera is. So this is, of course, an important thing to begin with when you start venturing into virtual reality coming from traditional film. That we have to rethink how these elements, how we can replace these elements or rediscover these elements in the new medium. So you have the metaphor about the marble, the statue being inside the marble. Do you know this? That you have to remove the excess stone to see the statue. And in a way, that works for storytelling as well, because you have to take away a lot of reality to see the story you want to convey. You have to take away all those moments that don't matter to see the line, the storyline. So in a way, you can translate that metaphor to storytelling, that you have to take something away to see that which you want to show. So what in VR, since you have a world, how can you take it away? Which element can you use to do this? Then you have another strong tool or part of film telling, which is the mimetic. Epic narratives told their stories through narrations. Drama showed their stories by having players enact the drama. So this is the mimetic element that we imitate, and to imitate, while imitating, things get clearer to us. We can take a distance and we can see certain processes, human interactions, a bit enlarged. You could also say externalized. And with externalization, I mean that you sort of enlarge internal processes and translate them into a drama. So in this film, I don't know if you know Amadeus, it's an old film. You can see, on one level, it's a story about two composers competing with each other, the rebel genius and the mediocre doubter. But you could also see this as a metaphor for feelings or opposing forces that we all have inside us. The urge to believe in what we do and the negative voice inside us that talks us down. So that's what I mean with an externalization or an enlarging of processes we see in daily life, but they are difficult to recognize or isolate because we have so many impressions. This is another example of the same mechanism. This you can either see a not very credible way and very complicated way of killing someone by using a crop duster plane, or in the context of the film you can see a metaphor in an image of someone who's really afraid of showing his true self to the world with all his fallacies and vulnerabilities. So my belief, and this is like a hypothesis, and it's hard to prove this, but I believe that to identify with someone, you actually need some distance. And the moment you enter the scene and you sort of become part of that world, you lose that distance, and it's not so easy to identify with characters who are playing, enacting things in front of you. This presence, it makes you, it puts you in relationship to the world you are in. So you react to it, you respond to it in a different way than when you're at the back of the cinema thinking you're Tom Cruise or Cary Grant or whatever. This is a VR film which was also made as a short story, and this illustrates this for me. There is a piece in this film which is dialogue between this old sailor, disillusioned sailor, and a young girl. And in the short film version, the theatrical version, this works very well with the traditional cinematography and shot, counter shots, and you listen and you go along with the dialogue. But in VR, I'm all over the place, and people are talking there, but they're not talking to me, so I don't really relate to what they're talking about. I'm more interested in exploring and looking at the world around me. And this part of the VR experience, when the ship goes down and you drown and you go underwater, and you really have this surging feeling of being drawn down into the space, into the virtual space, even if I'm just standing with these goggles on my head and I can turn around, but I feel the space and I feel the movement. That's the part that works mostly for me. So, as a natural, this comes out of what I just said, that for me, the first-person perspective in VR works better than the third person, the fly on the wall, because I am in the world, I am in this relationship with the world, so I need to, the perspective of the story needs to, for me at least, it is personal, I think, to be inside the character, or at least one character. In film, this is also from a transmedial project, which was a documentary, beautiful documentary, Notes on Blindness, and it's about being blind. So here, this illustrates the traditional film way, where you can objectively see what happens, because he says, I love it when it rains inside, because when it rains inside, he can actually identify the space around him by the sound. If there's no sound, that part of the world dies. Is the narration. In the VR version, you can experience this in a special way by having a world that is essentially dark, and only the sound lights up parts of the landscape where there is activity. So I can experience this firsthand instead of taking the third-person perspective in film, which also works very well, but it works in a different way. So, if the cinematography doesn't work and the mimetic element doesn't work, what do we have to work with? What do I have to work with as a storyteller when I want to make a VR experience with emotional impact? Because my experience is that I'm quite often still in, not every experience, but many experiences, I still feel a bit left out. I'm not as engaged as I would like to be, as I am in a film. I don't invest as much in the characters. So I've been pondering, trying to identify what to work with. And my supervisor sent me an article about cinematic and the spatialized screenplay, and this sentence stood out for me: how narrative can occur across space. She uses examples from art history. It's also something which you talked a little bit about. I don't know the history of this picture. I just know that there are 3 times. This is a story, like this happens first, and then this happens, and then that happens, but it's all captured in one image. So it's temporality, but spatially told or conveyed, different than film. And this was very meaningful to me, because when you enter the world, what you have is space. You have a space where you can place your narrative elements, and you can explore them. This is the Bayeux tapestry. It's also from I think it's also from the Middle Ages. I don't know. And it's also a narrative in a space, placed in space. And also quoting Nadja Lipsyc, you start with the feeling of the body in the space. This is sort of my current working theory. environmental storytelling is something we use in film as well. I mean, it matters where you situate a scene because the setting always contributes to the story, but it's more a background thing. In video games, when I played this with my sons, they were operating and I was telling them what to do, I could see how good they are at reading the environment, at reading the clues and the hints that are very, in this game, very skillfully placed in the environment, and that you can use to sort of puzzle together a narrative. And all these thoughts and my list, I don't have it here now, but my list of features which I felt my virtual experience, which I'm also going to make as part of the research. I'm not only going to talk about it, present, I hope, and reflect on it. I'm also going to make something. And I've moved now towards a more personal project. I was talking about my research proposal was traveling in time, and I still want to travel in time, but I want to travel in time more close to home. This is an old photograph of my, what do you call it in English? Great-great-grandmother, who was a tapestry artist. This is her, Frida Hansen, she's called. You may have heard of her. This is my grandfather. She had a very intriguing life story. For me, as the only artist, I think, in my family. For the rest, they're all doctors and very university smart. And sometimes I feel a bit lost because I'm doing things which are not so, which are much more insecure and much more, they're more difficult to lay your hands on. But she was, she had an interesting life story, which is not what I'm focusing on in the piece I want to make. But she also had this element in her work of temporality in space. She uses a lot of symbols in the frames, in the framing of the image, and this is also like three life based on three periods in her life and what she learned from them or what she experienced during those times. So there is a lot of biography actually in this image, if you talk to art historians who can explain that to you. And I want to try to, also as an homage to her, because she has been an inspiring person for me. She had a lot of guts. She dared to, wait a little bit with that. She dared to go for her art in a very insecure time of her life when she had lost 2 of her children and her husband had gone completely bankrupt and had sort of bankrupt all of Stavanger actually. And that's where she found the strength to do what she actually always wanted to do, to be an artist. And she managed to be independent in a time where when that was not normal for a woman. She rebuilt the house she lost in Oslo, on a different place, used a female architect, and she also employed a lot of young women in her weaving atelier. So she wanted also to help others. She wanted to create art, and she wanted to create beautiful things, to make life more beautiful, which I think is a good motive. And she also helped other young women who didn't have many possibilities. I think they had 3 at the art school. In those days, they had 3 places for women. That was the only possibility for women to have education. So in her atelier, where she used old Norwegian weaving techniques and old Norwegian coloring techniques, she employed a lot of these young women. And this is a sketch based, of course, as you can see, on her work. And in this, this was the first attempt to create a world where you can feel her art, and also where you can. I'm trying to create an internal landscape where you can also get an insight into how she saw the world, because she was someone who saw her motives. At least that's what she says. Like, she has this carpet which is called the Milky Way, which is quite famous if you see it. I don't have it here now, but she in her memoirs she says, I was standing outside and there was the aurora, and I could just see these women carrying the veil of stars from the Milky Way, and she made this into a motive. So I would like to create an experience where you can sort of experience how she saw the world, with all the magic and all the beauty and the symbolism, and also hide in this world bits and pieces of her biography, so that you can, in a very minimally interactive way, an organically interactive way, can explore the narrative. So there will still be a narrative, but it will be fragmented, and you will have to piece it together yourself. This is also inspiration from the last sketch was also from one of the master students. Really quickly done, but it really helped me to visualize what I want to do. This is what's this called? Eivind Earl. He was a Disney concept artist, and his work also has this quality of internal landscapes more than realistic landscapes. There's lots of emotions, lots of sphere, lots of atmosphere in his images, and they are also an inspiration for how I want to approach this project. This was her recreation of her flower garden, which was her pride where she lived before the bankruptcy, and she kept returning to these motives. And if you I've talked to an art historian about this image, and she can tell you so much, about the symbolism that she uses here, which I also want to translate to my VR experience. Oh yeah, and this is. I'm also working with a production designer who is creating, because I needed to work with more visual stuff. Because of the 360 virtual world, just writing wasn't enough. I really needed to get into the world. So I've talked to a production designer, and he's going to make like a model, like a 3D model in the computer that you can go in, and I can explore, and I can try to place the story in space more than in on paper. And he said this. Let's see if it works. I probably have to press play. I don't know if you know this woman. Can you turn down the sound, because I don't really need the sound. She's a sand artist. And in a way, it was just an association he had when I explained about my project. And I think it's for me, it was a good visual, inspiration, because it's also images in space, and she draws motives, and then she takes them away, and she draws another motive, and it is. it becomes a world. And I thought if you can create a world in VR which sort of has that dynamic, it would be really cool. Yeah, you can look it up. So that's where I am. Where am I in time? Thank you.
Are you kidding me? Okay.
No.
Sorry, I might need some adjustment time. So today I'm doing an experimental presentation. So thank you for contributing to my research. There are numbers of things that I might need your help understanding, as in, first off, do you get motion sickness because of the movements of my head? Because what you're going to see is what I'm seeing in VR. Then, is it very disturbing that you don't see me when I talk to you? And that I turn my back to you? How do you see the space? Those are elements that I will be interested in knowing. When I managed to make this work, it worked just before, but I can't let it sit alone, or it just crisis. So sorry about that. Well, this isn't. I think this should be all right. Okay, so the software that I'm using for this presentation is called Tilt Brush. It's now owned by Google. It's a drawing software. It's not a presentation software. So not only am I trying a presentation in VR for the first time, which might be a horrible idea, but it's not meant for that at all. The layout, I haven't designed it, so the credits, it looks pretty cool in VR. I'm not sure if it looks good on screen at all. But so yeah, I have no credit for it. I just moved around pieces, added a few things. But yeah, you will see. Okay, so. Can you see something? Because I can't see anything. Yes? But. Sorry? Okay, this is weird. Okay, so I'll start here. There is a lot of potential for comedy because there are cables everywhere, and I'm gonna turn around. So, yes, this is, I'm turning my back to you. Yes, I am turning my back to you. Hold on. Now I'm not turning my back to you, right? Okay. Yay! Easy fix. So I'm a second-year art researcher at CEFIMA, and my project is about bringing role-playing to virtual reality. And I'm thus going to talk to you about some techniques that I use for my 360 narratives. It is more of a personal overview than an overview of the width of techniques used for 360 narratives in general. Lone Wolves Stick Together is the name of the project that you will discover also along this journey. All right, so I didn't put CEFIMA everywhere, but it's here on the spaceship, so that should make up for it. Right, so let's move on here. Okay, so my name is Nadja Lipsyc. This is my face. Sorry. Oh yeah, I forgot. Hold on, very important. I did that for the lack of eye contact. Yes, there we go. Should work out. Right. So, did I break VR? by being silly. No, okay. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've done before, being in Lillehammer. So, I put my resume on a cyberpunk city, although it doesn't really deserve it, but yeah. I've been working as a game designer. I did some indie puzzle games. I did some indie adventure games. I did some transmedia games. I worked as a production assistant for big feature films with very little emphasis on the story. I've been doing serious games. This is a virtual campus for a business school. I studied neuroscience, and my master's thesis was in some sort of visual aid that we could assimilate to mixed reality. I have written and staged a few plays, and I have written and organized many, many live-action role-playing games, which is a big part of my research. So, yeah. There we go. The reason why I'm going through all that is to say that I've always been in search of creating great immersive experiences. And virtual reality, I didn't even need to try to know that it was something that I wanted to work with and that I could use tools from all those fields. But as I matured up, I also got to question my use and my interest in immersion and our time use of immersion, of spectacle in general. Okay, so first off, I can tell you that it's not because I don't see you that I'm not nervous. That's my own observation. Right. So immersion is a word that we use to describe many things. And I, again, had this discussion with a colleague here. And for me, at least, learning how to differentiate different types of what we call immersion has been helpful for on an ethical standpoint and on a design standpoint. So this is what the frame I work with. In French, we would call it dispositif, as Foucault would say, in the sense that there are power forces in between these layers and mechanics. So I don't use immersion anymore as much as I can. I avoid it. I use absorption if I want to say that a story is captivating. I use a state of flow if I want to say that I'm playing a game and that I'm lost in the mechanics and in the process. And I use illusion if I want to say that an environment is very realistic. Those are words that Gordon Calleja also uses, but the difference with this frame is that it's a very personal one. It's made from a creative point of view, not from the point of view of the user. So what I work with is a narrative frame. So that involves backstory, events, plots. Important enough to be distinguished, there is the character. I worked with first-person narratives, so the character that you end up playing, role-playing, if we count the human interaction, is also a frame to explore. I use game mechanics, human interaction, and there is a story environment. We'll go more through that as we explore it, and as I get to talk to you about my project, which is Lone Wolves Stick Together. It's a VR project inspired by the movie Stalker by Tarkovsky. It's meant for 6 players. It's scripted role-playing in the sense that it's not completely make-believe. You don't just come up and pretend like you're an explorer. You are given a role. This role has been pre-written. There are events, there are flashbacks, there are narrative techniques that come and give some rhythm and structure to the experience. But there are also some elements of exploration. But we'll see more of that. So let's move on to the first technique. The first technique that I'm using is using physical experiences as models for VR experiences. What I mean by that, and Cecilia started talking about talking a lot about the presential experience. There is an easy way to try out if something works for presence. It's to try it in real life. Because, real life and presence work well together as well. Sorry. And I've been doing that with LARP, in the sense that organizing a physical LARP for me is a way to playtest some narrative techniques, some atmospheres, some sensations physically before I try to develop it in VR. And it allows me also to compare them, and it allows me to know if there are things that I want to tune up with what VR can offer that reality cannot. And so I started off with playtests. Hold on. So I organized my game, which is a journey, kind of an existentialist journey for 6 people who are all in a very, very bad place, trying to find a room in the middle of a mysterious zone where their most intimate desire could come true. And so they go from doubt to nostalgia, to disillusion, to despair, to truth, and then to that chamber where their most intimate desire can come true if they decide to step in. The whole game is about will they step in or not. So I organized it in nature, I organized it in a living room, changing the sets as the players would walk by the Thames. And it got me experimenting some sensations connected to nature, sensations connected to being in a black box and having very minimalistic settings. Hold on. This is very cool. And then I got to work with the production designer and the sound designers of the film school, of the bachelors, and we got to organize this in the huge 2 cinema studios of the film school. And so this is the same journey. No, that's actually, yeah, that's incorrect, but that doesn't matter. And yeah, so we got it to build up. This seemed like a good idea, but maybe it wasn't. So these are pictures of, yeah, that's an early sketch for one of the sets, which is doubt. Don't go away. Here, building. It's been 1 month construction, 1 month and plus reflection, and it ended up being quite monumental and very high quality. Is that it? No, there's one more. There's one more. So those are experiences. I'll show more pictures of these sets as they go. And more pictures of, more explanations on what I learned. So yeah, those are 3 of the themes that are explored in this journey, which are doubt here. So the idea was to have something quite underwhelming that doesn't really let you see a strong fictional space. Something here that is uncomfortable and dark for disillusion, and here is the fountain of truth. We also did, unexpectedly but very fortunately, a LiDAR scan of the full sets. So Rafal is actually helping out with modeling it, and the idea is, so here are all the sets in the film studios that were built by those teams. And hopefully we will be able to clean them up and re-experience them in VR. Hopefully I might be able to organize this game in VR as well, in those sets, and then it will give us some thinking about the difference between them. Yeah, it's also just an interesting way to document something that's been built, to have an actual scan that you can walk afterwards. Right, sorry, now I'm starting. Yeah, technique number 2. It's here. Right, where is it? It's here. Using environmental design to create denser aesthetics. Yeah, so Cecilie again also started talking about environmental design. And so my take on environmental design comes a bit more from video games and from the horizontality that we can have. Sound and art and narration at times are really on a flat structure, and so an environment is just as much a soundscape as it is a visual landscape, and that is how the teams have worked at the film school. The sound designers and the production designers have worked together on concepts, really. So that's a picture of some of our sound designers. I don't know, is it big or is it not big for you? Like this. Is it big enough? Can you see it, or do I have to? Okay, cool. Okay, so yeah, I'm actually giving them a little bit of screen time because they rarely have some. And you're not going to listen to any of their sound, which makes me a hypocrite, but sound is very important. Look at the picture of sound. Yeah. Right, and so those are more of the sets. That's the full set of nostalgia, where you had surround sound speakers hidden everywhere in the walls, really taking from clues from what you see, for instance, the piano, but also the fact that some rain was in the soundtrack made the production designer decide, I think, to put some, to have a water pump actually on the window. And then I'm just elaborating on how an environmental design can work, because it's also been a dialogue with me as a designer, because there was this this textile roof. I changed the flashback that happens in this act to include something with the idea of being under a tent and looking at the textile roof. So it's just to say that I think when you design for 360, it's important that you keep a very strong co-creation amongst the fields, and you do not try to rule the vision on everything. I think there is a lot of richness that comes up from this dialogue and this flat structure. Right, so technique 3 here. Okay, technique 3 is creating bridges towards the fictional world. So to elaborate on this, I'm going to talk about other first-person narratives. First off, I can start with that, which is the narrative game inspired by the Walking Dead series, where you have these typical choices to have to make you, it's a branched narrative, so you do have a few different ends possible. But what I'm interested in looking at this point is how engaged you are in the story. The thing is, you would be very lucky if one of those 3 options was exactly what you would have liked to say to someone. So it does create some rupture here. This is a 360 video, which is a movie called I, Philip, where you are in the skin of the robot of Philip K. Dick, which is fun, except this person has information and a voice that isn't yours, so the identification is fairly limited, although you are in their skin. And this is, well, immersive theater, Sleep No More by Punch Drunk, where the audience is the crowd of people you see wearing masks here, and they are invited to move around in a huge building and follow up characters from Shakespeare and watch them interact. So there is definitely the 360 element, the engaging element. However, they do not belong to the fictional world. Sometimes in immersive theater and sometimes in narrative games, you have a vague character that is assigned to you, or you have someone talking to you directly, and this direct address turns you in some sort of a performer of your own role. You become a fictional self without really having a character, which is somewhat, at least for me, it is a weird situation that I do not find very comfortable, because I know I'm playing along, but I know I do not belong to the fictional world where the characters are, and I know that I'm facing actors or an AI which are here to entertain me. So for me, the solution to that is role-playing and writing characters. So one of the possible bridges is character. This is really small. Engaging characters. Right. So how to write engaging or playable characters? Well, an engaging character has to be relatable, but we all come from different backgrounds. We do not share the same stories. So it is possible that one way of fixing it is to have a variety of different characters that you would then assign to people according to who they are. How you work that out in a live-action role-playing game, in live role-playing game, and what I've been doing is that you have a questionnaire that your players fill. According to their answer, you attribute them the most suitable character. So that's a way to make it more relatable. It's not a hard science, so it won't work for everybody, and you will have to disappoint people, but that's at least one solution. And then appropriable. So it's a way to make relatable easier, and it's also necessary, is to make it maybe a bit flexible, so the player can project whatever they want from their own story and their own past. Customization is part of appropriation. That's something that you can see a lot in the video games. You customize your avatar, so the physical appearance of your character in the space. That's something that creates a stronger attachment. That's something also that I did in Lone Wolf Stick Together, in the sense, physically, I mean, in the sense that I had a props room where the players would come and pick props and costumes that they would see as suitable for their character, which helps, again, creating more of a connection. And then there are the potentials of action that this character has. So there is a LARP scholar called Erik Fatland, who is also a Norwegian person, who says that the ultimate non-playable character is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, king of Gondor, because everything that he has to do is to sit in a corner and look cool. And that is absolutely right, and that's an issue that we might do when we want to play a game. We want to play something that comes from popular culture, someone that seems cool to us, but what's actually engaging and playable is someone that has things to do. So it can be narrative action, as in having some information that you can reveal that is going to trigger something. It can be an activity. For instance, your character is a photographer that is doing something, and then you have their project in hands. It can be connection, as in your character has relationships to explore and to further investigate, or potentials of relationships. Another solution for bridging towards the fictional world is what I call the ferryman. This is why I made a ferryman. And yeah, so the ferryman is different, is similar to guides, but the difference is that they know about both worlds. They know about the reality and they know about the fictional world, and they are here to take you to the other side. Oh, what's funny enough is that my last ferryman actually happens to be in the room. Hi, Anya. So Anya was a ferryman in one of the experiences I organized around Lone Wolves, where one actor was in disguise and pretending to be a participant like the others, and ended up breaking the mask progressively by showing how to interact both with the environment and with the other actors. So it's a guide towards the fictional world, and it tremendously helps. These are some participants playing with masks. Masks is another great tool if you want masks or avatar to also, again, get into the fictional world, because you get to wear the fiction on yourself. All right, technique 4. Oh no. Hold on. I need to look at the base stations. Hi. Right. Where am I? Too far. Right. So, sorry. Using world building to create various experiences is another technique. I hinted that I organized several types of experiences in the game studios. So it was all lone wolves stick together. It was all in this environment, following some similar themes, but those three experiences were very much different. And how I wrote them is using this environment, and this is what we call world building, which is a word that a term that I didn't use before, but production designers brought to my attention the existence of this person called Alex McDowell, who is a designer that has been working on Fight Club, Minority Report, Watchmen, a lot of big franchises. And the idea of world building is that you can start by building a world, an environment, and because of the laws of this environment, because of its ecosystem, politics, then you have a coherent story. You can create a coherent story. You can imagine the life of a character that would exist in this world and why they did what they did when they did. And so that's the technique that I actually used, although I had already my first experience, which was this 6 players game, a role-playing game, very meant to use all the techniques that I had, etc. I wrote other experiences based on this environment to make them more accessible to different people. And so, hold on. And so the first module was called, module of experience is more appropriate than experience. So the first module was float, which is floating on the surface of the narration somewhat. So it was more of a narrative visit where the visitors could get some aspects of the narration, could follow up a bit of a character, but where they were accompanied by a non-diegetic guide, which would tell them a bit about the strengths. Then there is swim, which is swimming in the waters of the narration, which is where I used the ferryman and a guide as an actor, which is closer to immersive theater, and it was an opt-in, opt-out experience, as in you can either role-play or remain passive, and it's meant to feel comfortable and hopefully to trick you into wanting to role-play. In general, people did role-play quite a lot, that was good. And the dive, which is dive straight into the narration, have a character, role-play it fully, and that was the original one. So that's probably, that's one of the biggest learnings that I've had from this experience, to see that I can use world building as well to create modules, that I don't need to strip off the original experience, but I can write other types of experiences really thanks to this technique. So another part of world building was the fact that we also had some students, director and cinematography students, who have shot movies in these sets which were conceived based around this universe that I created, and that's really the richness of these stories is really what made it world building. So I'm going to remove that as well. No, go away. No, hold on. Okay, it doesn't.
Not yet. It's 4:40.
It's 4:40. Okay. Mods for games. I'll just show that really quick. Ow. So yeah, now it's just flickering in my headset anyways. Okay. So yeah, I'm not seeing anything. Right. Come back. Right, so this is a mod. So a mod is something, mods for video games are often fan developed, and there are different ways of experiencing the same video game, and in a way it's similar to world building. So this is a mod for GTA 5, which is called 5M, and you have people role-playing and creating complete stories in this environment. Thousands of people and on thousands of different servers doing that. This is VR chat, where you have people role-playing a drinking game. And so those are game spaces where there is no pre-made scenario, but I hope you can perhaps imagine that they are a fertile ground for actually scripted experiences. And so I'll just fly to the fifth technique, which is cultivating meta-awareness and creating bridges towards the creative world. What I mean by cultivating with meta-awareness is that you do not need to design as immersive, as engaging, as captivating of an experience as possible. It is not because the technology allows you to do it that it's something that you must accomplish. Maybe you do not want people to lose track of their time and to lose track of reality. Maybe you just want to explore the artistic potential of the medium. That's maybe you think it's actually interesting and aesthetic to have a dialectic between what you know of reality and what you know of this fictional world. To have a, oops, I lost my second hand again. Yes, to have an aesthetic of this superposition of two milieus that's close to the fight between the inheritance of Wagner with Gesamtkunstwerk, sorry if there are German people, which is the total work of art, and the epic theater of Bertolt Brecht, where Brecht considers that it's perhaps more interesting to give some creative agency to the audience and to let them meta-reflect on what's happening, not to try to entirely absorb them in the story, but to have them reflecting. For that, what I did with Lone Wolf Stick Together is that I used narrative methods that I do not have time to talk to you about, but you can ask me about them. And I guess I'm getting out. Here we go. Yep. Did I? I was predicting this would happen. Yeah, that would be good. Oh, that was an experience.
It was an experience for us.
Maybe it's
yes, thank you so much for lovely presentations. It's I can't brag too much about the diversity in the group since I've been in the committee hiring all of you, but it's very interesting to see the variety both in age, experience, and interest in where all of this is going. These are 5 very different projects, also, of course, some of you have been working longer on them than others and have come further in your research. But I think you're a group that can get a lot out of each other. And I think maybe, I hope also it's been inspiring for you to see each other's work today, and that you'll tap into each other for help. So we really have some questions, but the point of this is also to hear from the audience and your reactions. If you have any questions for any of these fine people sitting here. Or are you just all confused and seasick?
Sorry.
I actually have a question for Cecilie, because you had the Frederick Howard's quote about games being now a more impactful storytelling form. And then I was curious that you have not chosen to make a game.
No.
You have chosen to make a 360 VR experience. So why did you at some point, when you understood that La Jetée was not going to happen, and you had this quote, were you at some point thinking to make a game? Or how do you think that this VR experience can do what we think a game can do?
I'm not thinking of what I do as a game. I'm thinking...
It's not a game at all.
It's not a game, no, I don't have the game. I think the quote from Fredrik, it was taken out of a longer article in Rushprint, which was just, I don't know, this week or last week. And it just is a reminder. It was a reminder for me as a filmmaker and a film lover that it's easy to become a dinosaur in this landscape, because I notice now that I'm talking not on a daily basis, but often with so many people who are so much into the interactive and the gaming industry, I realize that there's a lot of innovation going on there, which, and I can see it with my teenage children, that they are really into it. So I can see that there is a future there. But for me, the interactivity and gaming, it doesn't necessarily mean, interactivity doesn't necessarily mean gaming. I just think that the moment you go into a VR setting, there is a level of interaction because you are part of the experience. So you can't ignore the person who goes into it.
I think Maureen has taught many of us reluctant film students over the years, and being an early missionary for interactive storytelling and seeing that maybe it is actually not just for children. And onto the Queen's game and portraying Akershus. This is more of a technical question because I'm interested in it. I'm also involved in the project. But in terms of making a realistic representation, will you use photogrammetry or will you recreate something from scratch? How will you technically go about recreating a huge fortress?
Well, one of the things about Akershus is that in the 14th century it was not as huge as it is now. So we managed to find some ground plans for the right time, and we managed to find some sketches that the architect who did the restoration in the 1920s made before he covered up all the walls that were there before. So the answer to your question is that we do want to make a real contrast between the world of Akershus that Margrethe lived in and the fantasy world of the Arthurian realms where she goes to find inspiration. The story of Lunetta in that realm is about a girl who, on her 11th birthday, rather than accepting her father's decision that she is to go and marry the man he wants her to marry, runs away and tries to become a minstrel in the court of Queen Guinevere. So there's a kind of interplay between our fantasy idea of what princesses do and what real ones do. So we must create something in Akershus that feels much more like the real Middle Ages than the Middle Ages in the fantasy world. How we actually do that is a technical issue which Snowcastle is working on. And at the moment, it's so embryonic that the most we can do is really look and see if we can get the right sort of proportions, the right kinds of places where things happened. But part of the idea is that Margrethe overhears things which the people in that castle are talking about and doing. So how real those characters, NPC characters, are going to be is just going to be a question of experiment. So ask again in 6 months' time.
I will. Definitely. Also, please raise hands if Ellen.
For the Queen's game, you made an emphasis that she's a stateswoman and that you're using the chess as showing a part of her mental, intellectual, etc., strategic capacity. But will you also add more elements than the castle itself to elaborate on that she's a stateswoman?
One of the things that's happening at the moment is that we're focusing on her early life. She arrives at Akershus and she has her only child, Olav, there when she's 17. And really that's a lot of stuff already. So part of the chess interface is that I hope we can use it to maybe do a bit of time jumping, to see a little bit more about what she might do after she's 17. But that's going to be dependent on how the dramaturgy for the game develops in its first year, and then we'll try that. But certainly what I want to do is make the connection between being a tactician and a strategist, if you're playing chess, and using the figures on the chessboard to represent the kinds of people that they might have been in real life. So how do you deal with bishops? How do you deal with armies? How do you deal with pawns, which are the ordinary people? Watch this space.
Return in 6 months.
Yes.
Another question. Yeah. Oh, där var den där.
Sorry, it's kind of an open question, so whoever feels called might just reply. I was wondering what your thoughts are when you are designing your experiences and your research, looking at things from a systems perspective and developing things to be able to be repeated and built upon, or simply creating emotional experiences that need bespoke programming, for instance. Because the way we talk about these narrative experiences, it can be either or it can be a blend of the two. So I was wondering about your approach to this.
Well, I certainly believe in trying to recycle stuff, that the system is as important as the individual narrative. But obviously there are certain things which don't fit into certain categories. So I like to keep a record of everything that's being done and to discuss it with other people and see how these approaches might help other people to work with storytelling. But I think some are more individualistic than others, I don't know.
Yeah. For our previous game, we did everything, or almost everything, per scene, and tailor skreddersøm, bespoke, and that is extremely expensive and inefficient. And so for our next production, we will be focusing very heavily on doing things smarter, without losing quality. But we're still working on how.
I don't think I really understood what you meant.
Is your research transferable? Are you making a system which other people might use with different content? Is that right? Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Not necessarily other people, but also for your own sense. Like, is your experience something that you're making as, like, playing chess is a system, and you can play a million different chess games, but it's still the same rules?
Yeah.
Or are you thinking in terms of this is a linear narrative? Well, not necessarily linear narrative experience.
I think it's more about creating, for me at least, one approach that sort of proves or shows my subjective experience or my subjective feeling about what could work. I mean, no film is the same. Of course, you know, these conventions will settle along the way, but it's hard to predict which methods will stick and which won't. So, but of course, I will try to document like different approaches that I did to come to the work that I finally make, and then people can draw on that, maybe to see, oh, maybe I could use that approach, or maybe I can use some of that. But it's bits and pieces. I think it's every project should, or to me at least, should be unique and in a way not reproducible. But that's in a story, from a storyteller's point of view. I mean, not a mechanic, not a like making things for that you can use the same chair in a different game or whatever.
I wanted to ask Elin regarding, you said that at least the 360 video, in some respects also VR lends itself very well to evoke empathy, maybe even more than film. But using VR might also create a bigger distance in terms of the uncanny valley, and that something gets a bit creepy, and you rather create a bigger distance. How do you look at that for your VR documentary?
I think uncanny valley is really about sort of feeling that something is off, it's not right. And I think it's especially when you try to animate and recreate something human in an artificial way, that you get this because somehow the face doesn't fit. And for my experience, I want to explore using volumetric capture, filming actual faces, actual people, so that we haven't animated them, that it is the facial expressions. And I think that will feel more real to us. As humans, we pick up on these small muscular movements, and those can make a huge emotional impact. So I think it's really to avoid recreating, animating, but rather trying to capture actual body language.
Yeah, interesting. I like it. Yeah, but I think it's still a challenge
Yes.
because that has not really been done.
Yeah, and that's the fun and scary part is I have no idea if it's possible, but then that's the artistic research is to have this motivation of what I want to achieve, and then to see if I can get there.
Yeah. And that's, I think, is also very cool with your project, Nadja, because with LARPs you do get real emotion because it's real people participating. But now you are taking those real people role-playing into a virtual environment. So do you, as a LARPer yourself, do you get a different experience when you're in the virtual space or when you're in the studio setting? How does it affect you differently emotionally?
Well, I can only speculate on the question because I haven't organized the game in VR yet. I know it will be different because there are things like eye contact and touch that won't be accessible, but I also believe that there is an enhanced vulnerability when you connect with people virtually sometimes, that you can be, like I saw how it was easier for some people to roleplay wearing a mask, how it allowed them to distantiate themselves and to feel less self-conscious. Thank you. I think the same mechanic can happen with avatars. There are a lot of things that I'm very curious about that. So it's a question. It's going to be very much an empirical answer at some point to this question. But,
Nice. I have to see if there are hands. Also for you, Bendik, I was interested in your slide about story structures, which I think you could have spent even more time on to see, to experiment in terms of your different narrative structures, the linear structure, the personal, and the creative AR, and then the community. And I'm interested in hearing your, that would be guesses, educated guesses on how that would affect the story structures. You were talking about Romeo and Juliet. How do you think that could pan out with creative AR? How would that pan out with a community-driven push?
Currently, the way I intend to use community, which is a default version, is basically just getting an early version of the game out and watch how people interact with it and learn by talking to people, but also watching metrics and seeing what they're doing, like by numbers. But that's not really tapping into the creative power that's there. And as I made that a dotted line because I don't really know how to solve that yet. But for the AI-driven narrative, I imagine I can try to rephrase that. So, if a story has various characters that instead of being defined, are defined by personality traits and relations to other characters, then in my universe I can make all the different non-play characters have relations to each other and personality traits, so that I can then create multiple undefined or defined stories with undefined characters. And then the game will always look at the available NPCs in the game, and then as soon as it has a match, it can then apply that story in that setting on those characters that are available.
How would you use that in a Romeo and Juliet example?
So, for example, in the beginning of our game, we have a small refugee camp and a bandit camp, and they are fighting. That's not in the Queen's game.
No. I'm just doing the Romeo and Juliet thing.
Okay.
The Montagues and the Capulets.
Yeah. So here you could have a bandit princess or girl and some other refugee person fall in love, and they're of course not supposed to be together because these two factions are opposing each other. But then if the player interacts with the environment, they can make the bandit camp disappear by taking it down, and now the village will prosper and grow. So what could be one story between these two factions can now be the same story told inside a bigger village where there's now a merchant and another merchant that are fighting, which is more like Romeo and Juliet. So, so that way, the same story can be told with completely different characters. But I have to figure out how to define a character with the personality traits that makes it possible to apply that story on different random NPCs.
Well, if you take the Romeo and Juliet example, the traditional commedia dell'arte does that in a way that the characters are defined and the players improvised within a framework. So it's quite an interesting place to start. Some work has been done on that, the idea of commedia dell'arte as a model.
Yeah, QED as in we have a lot of learned from each other.
Cecilie?
Yeah, no, because this is sort of opposite of what I think of as dramatic storytelling, because in the dramatic storytelling, all the characters have their they are relation to the main characters. They shed light on features of the main characters. So it's. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, but this type of storytelling wouldn't be the main story. This would be the side plots. So you would, as a player, intersect with the story of Romeo and Juliet and maybe help out one of them or take some secondary role to drive that plot to the end.
Think of a way of stopping Juliet from...
and have a happy ending. So.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what it would do. It would disrupt that. the traditional storytelling, but you would also have no control over the narrative, in a sense. So you would know if the players got the best story they could. No. So that is a bit what creating interactive stories is about. It is about, in a sense, giving up creative control, which I guess can be frightening as well. Yes.
In terms of that, when you have more possibilities of interactivity, then you give more storytelling, or you create your own story while you're engaging into the interactivity. Will it then be less relevant with the difference between fiction and documentary, or fiction and non-fiction? Do we need that division? Like Elin was talking about, why do we need the division between non-fiction and fiction when it all the time moves towards more interactivity and more that you as a, as an audience or as a user, you become co-creator of the story?
I think for me, I thought a bit about this because with the mobile game, which we've sort of been talking about as a non-fiction game, but then it also feels fictional. And I think really that non-fiction or documentary is a lot about the motivation of the storyteller. If you have a communication model, the sender, because I think in an interactive experience, it's much more a relationship with the receiver or the player, so that the motivation behind the whole experience is more the journalistic one or the documentary one, that we want to communicate a message. So I think that's basically the biggest difference. Yeah.
So, I mean, with documentary, we've noticed the way there's a tendency to use fictional forms in things which describe themselves as documentaries. And even if you look at the wildlife programs that we all love, I'm sure you've all been introduced to meerkats in one way or another. You know, you can see through the ages. In the 70s, meerkats were an example of shared responsibility and were a wonderful community. Then in the 80s, it was discovered that meerkats were wicked gangs which rushed and crushed each other if they possibly could. And then in the 90s, the same meerkats are suddenly a program called Meerkat Manor, which was a soap in which real meerkats were observed and turned into soap characters, and their lives followed. So documentary already uses fictional forms as a way to engage viewers, and I can see that it'll become more so because the conventions, you can't defy the conventions completely, because people get lost. They don't know how to make their story if they don't have some generic conventions to work within. It'll be interesting to observe.
But I'm wondering if the documentary and fiction growing together is because I think also documentary has learned a lot from fiction in the way that the way you present your story makes it more engaging and actually more manipulative. I know a documentary maker, and she situates it very, very documentary-like, but she actually tells them, "Oh, discuss this," you know. So it's, but Eskimos, I'm thinking the interactivity. I don't have so much experience with it, but I think a very important element is that the choice you make has impact. I think you framed this in your last presentation, that it has to be a valid choice. I mean, I remember in Bandersnatch, it was like, do you want Frosties or what was it? Choco chips or whatever. It was like breakfast cereals. And I was like, I don't care, I don't like any of them. But so it has to be, but what you talked about, but what is much more about in your game, as I understand, is that you get confronted with impossible choices, which sort of has the effect of you as a player that you feel helpless. which is an emotional effect, which I think is much more interesting aspect of the interactivity than the choices, because I hate choices. I mean, it takes a lot of time and mental energy to choose between coffee and tea. So, I mean, I try to avoid those when I'm in a relaxing mode. But I think it's very interesting, this element of stealth. I think, I don't know if this is a common, it's a game term, but I had it from Christie, but that you, by doing something, you learn what your impact is on the world you are put in by the game, like in your game, that you learn by conditioning, actually, what the effect is on the child you have taken into your care. And that is a very strong element of interactivity, if you use it like that. But if it's just about choices and branching, and I mean, that's not for me. I mean, it's maybe for other people, but it's not for me, because, as I said, I don't like to choose.
That's something that's sort of core to what I want to explore. It's the emotional weight of different kinds of choices. Since you're in this, I want to confront people and poke people when it comes to prejudice, and they will have interactions. Interactions are choices in some form, and how heavy are they to us? And it's much more manipulative to be confronted with an impossible choice. And I think then to sit and watch sort of impossible or confronting stuff happening in a linear film. And I think one of the things that I'm really thinking about now is that in VR, creating a VR experience, I think I'm much more of a host, inviting you in, because the experience is yours as the user or player, or whatever name you have. A VR experience is your physical experience. You are inside it. And if you're confronted with something nasty, it's much more personal than if you're watching something you don't like in a film, because it happens to you, you're in it. So I think that this sort of, to respect this distance and to give room for the user to reflect and to not be too imposing is important, because otherwise it'll be too much, and I think you'll just reject the experience instead of being able to interact with it. So, but just this host element is quite important, I think.
That's a good term. Yeah.
I'm going to stop
We're
you there.
on time, yeah.
We could probably keep this conversation going for quite a while longer. And I think once all of these projects have developed for another 9 months to a year, we might reconvene and see where things are at now. But for now, we're about 20 minutes over time. Thank you very much, Ellen, for coming in hosting
very quickly.
This. And Maureen, Nadja, Bendik, Cecilie, Elin, thank you all for presenting. Thank you for coming.
Yep.
Next month, we're changing focus completely from interactivity to classical cinema. Our